secure escape.
Hey, welcome back to another episode. You are here. You are in the right place at Last in Line Leadership Podcast, where you will be encouraged and inspired to walk in the fullness of the leader you are called to be. This is a place where you will hear about the goodness of God and the hope found in His promises to us. My prayer is that you will be empowered as a servant leader from what you hear in this episode of Last in Line Leadership. Well, I got to welcome back for the third time here to Last in Line Podcast, and it is an honor for me especially, but I want to welcome Pastor Alan Clayton to Last in Line Podcast. Hello, sir.
Good to see you, John.
How you been, sir?
I'm doing well, man.
Well, it wouldn't be a Friday afternoon if I didn't have my black coffee next to me, so I hope that doesn't make anyone uncomfortable that's watching on YouTube, but I will be drinking my coffee, and we will be talking about a topic today that has been a little heavy on my heart, and I know pastors in the world of ministry are not a stranger to this topic, but death is a real thing. It's part of life, as you always have heard, and Pastor Alan Clayton has been senior pastor of the Ark Church for fill in the blanks more than 25 years. I know, right? How many?
26.
26.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
26 years and really has been in ministry longer than that because you were part of Lakewood Church and the Osteens and doing a lot of leadership roles there, kind of cutting your teeth on vocational ministry without really even knowing that's what you were doing. But can you give us an idea?
I did
Go ahead.
sales, Don. That's why
you were salesman.
that's why I know that we could do Friday afternoon, because no self-respecting sales rep is going to be making sales calls at this time on Friday afternoon.
That's true. That's true, because usually you've hit your quota of numbers that you have to hit for making attempts at getting in front of customers, and that's no different for me. And so for my boss, if he's listening, hey, I had a free afternoon, couple hours, bear with me here on a Friday.
and no one's ever there on Friday afternoon. That's the challenge.
In fact, some customers probably don't take kindly to someone showing up to sell them something on a Friday. That's what we'll go with anyway.
We'll go with that.
Well, hey, for the audience that may not have caught the first couple times you've been on the podcast, give us an idea. Like I was going to ask you now that you mentioned sales, when did you realize that the calling on your life was for being a teacher and a pastor, and when did you know that was going to be just kind of your full-time gig?
You know, it's funny, but I knew it long before I was willing to acknowledge it. And, I was the guy in college who was notorious for bumming out parties, because I would ask all these deep questions, you know, and these people are looking at me like, bro, you need to you ain't right, because you know I'm looking at friends. I was looking at some friends of mine one day, two good friends. We were sitting around, and I just would get philosophical. I went, "What are you guys going to be doing in 15 years?" And one of them said, "I'm going to be," I'm going to be running my own business. And another one said, "I think I'm going to be working in corporate America." They looked at me and said, "What are you going to be doing?" I said, "It's going to sound weird, guys." I said, "But I'm going to be preaching in 15 years. And I think they were probably enough under the influence where they bought that idea. They thought that was, oh yeah, that's cool. Ironically, all of us are doing exactly what we said we were going to be doing.
Really?
I was almost 15 years to the day that I started the church. And so I think a lot of guys can tell you, especially at that call to full-time ministry, you can sense it early. All of us are called, but recognizing what we're called to. In fact, a lot of times when people come to the Lord, they sense that purpose and they sense that calling, and they automatically assume I'm going to be a preacher. And then oftentimes they find, well, you know, you're called, maybe it's not that. And so I knew it for a while, and then went to Bible school, you know, and even in my time in sales, I actually turned down management opportunities and different things because I didn't feel like it would be a long range goal.
Yeah, I think, like you said, especially when we get on fire early in our walk in our faith, and we have this transformation and this radical, just almost upheaval spiritually, we do feel really like drawn in that direction because we've got this newfound fire and passion and energy, and we feel alive again, and we want to gravitate toward that feeling, right? The gospel and the people of God and the family,
Right.
the church family. I mean, who wouldn't feel? And so I think I even think I thought I was called to be a full-time pastor, but I mean, what people don't realize is that, like you said, we are all in ministry of
Right.
some kind. We all
Right.
are called to, the Great Commission applies to all of us, not just the fivefold ministry,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yeah. But when you come to a relationship with the Lord, I think for the first time you have a sense of purpose that did not exist before. And so it's so easy to take that and look for something concrete. Well, man, I just feel this over. I guess I'm supposed to be a preacher. And so I think sometimes that's where a lot of guys went that route and then decide, "Ooh, maybe this is not it." But it kept coming up in me, and so I knew that's what I was called to do.
Well, so given that you've done this for a few years, you've performed several wedding ceremonies, several funerals. I wonder, have you seen, I don't know, in the way that you see the body of Christ respond to loss in the years, has it, this is a dumb question as I hear it out loud, but the reason I ask it is because COVID seemed to have magnified everything. And so loss during the last 2 to 3 years, it almost seems like there's an extreme, almost polarizing reaction to death or loss now versus, I don't know, as I'm growing up, you see people and they die, and it's like you're sad, and people kind of move on. We grieve and we move on, but I feel like death has this lingering effect on us lately. Am I off in that?
I don't think you're off, John. I think it was the focus shifted so strong to disease, loss. The media's got, if you're on 24/7, you got to come up with something to talk about. And so they're constantly talking about it, and that's something that it scares people. It attracts people. It's the car wreck that you're drawn to as you and so I think some of that was the reasoning, and the focus, and a lot of people weren't ready. And so losing loved ones, the surprise of that, the shock of that, really, it takes faith to live. It takes faith to die.
Wow.
And so, a lot of times folks just, they aren't there. They're not ready yet.
Yeah. Well, and I guess so as we go into this conversation, I kind of want to, if we need to, I want to hone in on maybe the tragedy of death. And like you said, when it's least expected in a family or close people, because a 95-year-old grandmother that has been a churchgoer and woman of faith, and she dies of just natural cause. Like, it's sad, but it's almost a celebration to the believers, right? The group of believers that know where her eternity is. But whenever it's a tragedy and life is taken in our mind prematurely, we have a different way of reacting. What's been your observation when it comes to just even believers, lost people, I think maybe have, and people that I haven't necessarily understood what eternity looks like with Christ, they have a different perspective than a group of believers. But I would still say, and you tell me if I'm wrong, believers even, they can come unraveled. Am I right?
Oh, totally right. Over the years, as we've watched it, because we have been a part of, I've got so many associates now, they can do a lot of the funerals, but I still do funerals. In fact, I would much rather do a funeral than a wedding. Because funerals, I think people actually listen sometimes in funerals because they come face to face with something they don't want to face, and that's death. Weddings, people don't give a rip. No one ever goes to a wedding going, hey, I wonder what Pastor Allen's going to share at the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, I wonder what we're going to be eating.
Yeah.
Guys are like, what are we going to be eating? And the girls are like, I wonder what the dress looks like. They don't care.
It's all about expectation. Yeah.
It's a total. But funerals, different story. And we have seen all over the map. And in fact, we've got some ladies that kind of help set up the logistics of it. And we just shake our head and go, when it comes to a funeral, people go off a bit. We really have to make allowances and be merciful. Some handle it with such grace and class, and some just they get a little crazy.
Yeah, they do. And I mean, I guess I want to read a couple, just some statistics here that I came across as I was researching, because when you think about a topic of this weight, your mind starts wondering about, wow, I wonder what the numbers are around some of this, because as you get deep into the trenches of the emotional side, you almost want, or I do, want to kind of get some context around the black and white data around it. And here's what I came up with. So the New York Times talked about in 2022, and this is not a surprise to anybody, but when you talk about mass shootings, we've had a spike, obviously, 531 year to date. And then the World Health Organization talked about 15 million deaths associated with COVID. Now, that number could be all over the map, I mean, depending on the source. But the WHO, I mean, say what you will about them, but that's where I got that number, and it might even be more than that at this point. The CDC says 45,000 gun-related deaths in 2020. So it's a little, the numbers take a minute to catch up, but half of those were suicides. And I would hate to be a cliche, but attribute some of that to COVID and some of the depression that took over.
Sure.
What do you think when you hear some of those tragedies and the mass shootings? And I'm a Second Amendment guy, and I know you are too. So I'm not here to say that guns are the problem at all. Right. But these are just statistics related to gun deaths. But there's a lot of tragedy and unforeseen death out there. Do you have any observations to some of those numbers?
John, I'm just convinced that what Paul wrote Timothy, when he said in the last days, perilous times will come.
Mm-hmm.
One translation said times of stress will come.
Mm-hmm.
And then he gets kind of a laundry list of where humanity goes, and it's not good. And so to say that the mass shootings, are they tragic? Yes. Are they surprising? Not really. It's a function of the time that we're living in. It's a function of the day. And think about it. The farther a people gets away from God, the more you see stuff like this, because the more they can yield to evil influences, the more they can get involved. And so, am I surprised? No, I'm not surprised. Is it horrible? Yeah. And, and especially I think of the ones that don't have a relationship with the Lord, it seems to strike them even harder. That's why Paul said we don't sorrow as them that have no hope. And so, not surprised. Again, the statistics, I heard someone say about 150 some thousand people will leave the earth today, worldwide. Mm-hmm. And so it really is it's part of life. Yeah. And people coming, people going. And it's the surprises and the unexpected, I think, that and the too youngs are the ones who really catch us.
Yeah. So have you had to, and I don't know that you could really prepare an outline for something like this and really stay on task, because I've been known to get off on a little bit of a rabbit trail when it comes to some of this, but I feel like wherever God's leading us because of the audience that might need to hear something. So my question would be a little bit off the beaten path when it comes to believers, non-believers, tragedy. The world as we know it today seems to have drifted a little away from their faith. Would you agree with that as a whole? Okay. Than they did 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
So, suffice it to say that. And then are people, when tragedy hits, do you see that just creates more of a wedge as a whole, I'm speaking accurately, obviously painting with a broad brush here, but do you think that drives more of a wedge nowadays, or do you think that is a avenue? I don't even know the right word, but a way for people to maybe come back to their faith when they're at the end of their rope and they're like searching for answers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think again, you see a lot of both. But what I've seen more than I'd like to say is people who get angry and bitter.
Yeah.
And, a parent dies or a loved one dies, and they get angry. And I hate that it drives some people into the anger side or a bitterness or just a blocking of God. But I'd say in the last 26 years since we've been doing this, the environment in terms of the spiritual environment in our country has changed. And even just what I would call biblical literacy has declined pretty tremendously whereas you look at years ago and there was a biblical standard where people could go to, including for death. And so again, the farther people get away from God, the farther they get away from the truth of scriptures, I think the more devastating death becomes to someone who has got a faith in God. There's always that sense of I will see them, a believer, that I'm going to see them again. And that sounds so trite, they've gone to a better place. But if you got someone who's a believer, they really are. And it really just causes it for me over the years, because I've dealt with so much of it. It's caused a shift and a perspective shift for me. I actually both my parents went to heaven just within the last 2 years. And so, but I remember praying and asking if the Lord would let both of them go ahead and come home, because their quality of life was so horrible. And I knew heaven would be better. And so I'm asking the Lord, just help them. Let them go home.
Well, can I ask a question if I jump in here real quick? What about someone someone like you, someone like in the fold of the faith, believers, parents who are in that same situation, maybe their parents aren't saved, because your parents were people of faith for a long time.
Yeah.
What is your advice in that situation of maybe even a prayer to pray, or maybe an opportunity they could look for to maybe minister to their parents before that time comes? Do you have anything for those people?
I'm gonna, if I have a parent who's lost and doesn't know the Lord, I'm gonna pray that God would send someone across their path, a laborer across. Jesus said, "Ask the Lord of the harvest to send laborers into the harvest." I'm gonna pray that. But then I'm also gonna look for opportunities. That's what Joy did with her. You've heard me tell that story about Joy.
Yeah.
With her stepfather.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
And how he for years had just kind of, no, Joy, you pray for me, and he had cancer. He was going, and Joy looked at him one day. She said the house got quiet, which for little kids it had to be a divine intervention. And she looked at him and she said, "Dad," she said, you really need to pray with me. You need to make Jesus your Lord. He said, "Joy, you pray for me." She said, "No, Dad, you need to pray." And I remember he said, "Okay, just this once." So I think
maybe it'll take. Yeah.
just this once. And she said, "Fine, just this once." And he prayed with her, and I think it was, I want to say within weeks. And a priest who came by at the request of Joy's mom and prayed with them said, "I haven't seen very many people die as peacefully as he's dealing with this." And so, we were thrilled. But Joy just, I think, realized the urgency of it, and so I think she kind of pressed. And sometimes when they're getting older like that, or they're not doing well, there's ever a time to press, that might be it.
Yeah, and sometimes it doesn't always, like you said a minute, it doesn't always come best from us to them. And so praying for those laborers to come and maybe somebody to, if it's a hospice worker, a nurse, I've heard of that being the case where someone that's a believer that's taking care of those folks, ministers or has some witness for them.
I had a grandfather that I only met once. It was on my mom's side. He was man, he was a player and left my mom when she was like 5 or 6 years old, left my grandmother a single mom. He was a musician, thought a ladies' man, just nothing about God in his life. Developed these ulcers, and he had to drink goat's milk. So he's online looking for where he can get goat's milk, or I think he answered. And there was in Georgia, Pentecostal preacher who sold goat's milk on the side.
Wow.
And reached him before.
Whoa.
Reached him before he went home, and just reached him. And one of those cases where you're thinking, ain't nobody reaching this guy. And so, I'll get to see him. But
God will touch you through the internet, it sounds like, too, even when you're shopping. Goat's milk, I'll show you, buddy.
Looking for goat's milk, yeah.
That's great.
That's good.
Well, I mean, I thankfully, and my dad, grew up a believer, but kind of wasn't like, at one point, I think he was trying to go to be a pastor and go to, seminary, but then got off track, went into the military, and then, but was always, you never doubted that he was a believer. And my dad always prayed and was always trying to be, better, but had no doubt of the reverence and God, he had for God. And so when it was just, there was a peace, even though it was extremely sad to watch him go, and it was a 10-year battle with cancer, it's good to have that little pocket of your heart that knows where they're going and knows they're going to be okay, and you're going to see them again, even though that grief seems really magnified and at the forefront of everything in that moment.
And it's real, and so many things are situational. I talked with someone recently who lost his wife to cancer. They'd only been married 20 years, had a beautiful marriage, 4 kids. The kids were still in high school when she went. Well, that impacted him even more than, say, me having both my parents leave within a couple of years from, but they're in their mid-80s and in poor health. And so my grief, my situation is a whole lot different.
Yes.
From theirs. And this is where I think, if we're not careful, we can lose sensitivity sometimes to people realizing, hey, losing your dog, love my dog, but losing your dog is not the same category as losing a spouse or losing a child. And so I think that this is where we need sensitivity, where people are, and sometimes where are they personally? Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And you led me right perfectly into this segue, and I trust me, audience, we did not plan this, so this is how I know that God is anointing this time right now, this conversation. So going into sort of the grief, and I want to ask your opinion, just based on what you've seen. I mean, you've been through it yourself, but kind of a blueprint as we go. But what are some of the mistakes before we talk about some of the better ways? And granted, nothing's cookie cutter when it comes to grief. Everything is, I mean, if you've seen one way to grieve, you've seen one way to grieve, right? It's not one size fits all. So what mistakes do you see people make during that grieving process, if there are any? Not that there is a right or wrong way, but what have you seen hardest to overcome, I guess is a better way, by the way that people grieve?
I think, again, the magnitude of the loss has to be taken into effect.
Right.
Losing a spouse is different from losing a grandmother.
Sure.
She was a 95-year-old saint. And so I think understanding that, I think one of the challenges is sometimes we feel like we have to say things to make them feel better.
Yeah.
And sometimes not saying anything.
Yeah.
It's just the best thing. If they're a friend who's showing up and just being there for them, and you're not trying to say things, like, well, I know they're in a better place. But, I think that can sound so hollow.
Yeah.
Who's just experienced a loss.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're glossing over it. They're in a better place, or, the one I hate the most is, when a child dies, the Lord needed another.
Oh, yeah.
And you can just, please take that one off the table. That one, that one. I think I've seen people or heard of people who reacted very negatively to that.
Correct.
God needed that, and I don't need God. And so it's
wow.
it's not something. So I think feeling like you've got to say something to make them feel better
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
is is this is where it helps to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit. Sometimes saying nothing, or hey, I'm here if you need me. Anything I can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to dive into that more with how we as bystanders can kind of, I don't get involved without getting involved. How can we be there for those people? Hey, before we step back into this great conversation with Pastor Alan Clayton, I want to thank the guys over at Uncommon Ministries. Uncommon is encouraging and equipping men to become the husbands, fathers, and leaders that they were meant to be. So I want to thank TJ and his team for partnering with us, for encouraging us, for helping get the word out of Last in Line Leadership, and for all the content they put out. Go check them out on YouVersion. They've produced a lot of content, a lot of devotionals around helping men and all the issues that we deal with. So check them out at uncommon.org and go support their ministry and reach out to TJ, connect, and just support what they're doing. So let's get back to the conversation with Alan Clayton. I'd like your thoughts, though, on if it's me grieving and I've lost somebody. Granted, like you said, it's all relative. Dog versus spouse, way different. But if it's a spouse or a premature, like God forbid, a child, or maybe a parent prematurely, what would you say to me that are some of the pitfalls of grieving and some of the ways I could go down a dark road as a grieving person? Like, what would you like to prevent me from experiencing in a negative way as a griever, I guess is a better way to say it.
Yeah, well, and I think the challenge is sometimes it's so easy to go to a dark place.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes for me as a pastor or something, and you hear someone go and maybe they're expressing anger at God or expressing, that they're mm-hmm. mad at him. Or the pastor side of me wants to go, whoa. And I realize sometimes that's probably a mistake. And just let them go ahead and talk it out, but then follow back up with them. So how are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
And, I had someone time that lost a spouse and was surprised and it was horrible. Man, he was going off on God, and it was via text. I remember I texted him. I wrote. I said, "Hey, if you'd like to hear a different perspective, I'd be glad to talk."
That's good.
So he opted not to, but I'm here if you need me. So I think some of that this is not the time to delve into doctrine. This is not the time to to try. And I've done that before. I've made big mistakes with that, and I'm realizing I think you have sometimes to let people go through that, but then go look. Hey, check back with them. Let them get over that initial. The ones that concern me, John, are the ones that years and years later, they're still in the same place. Those are the ones that concern me the most.
Yeah, and self-medication becomes a part of the equation because we're looking for an outlet of escape, right? Yeah. And so it's a fine line with where you get involved and where you start to notice that someone might be on a slippery slope. And so I guess my encouragement, in what let me rephrase. So what I found that worked well for me during that time, not only, I would say that it goes without saying, press into God more, like go toward him, not away from him, like get as close as you can, not separate yourself or isolate. I think isolating is a bad idea.
I agree.
But it's also hard to want to get in, around people when you have any advice for, I don't know if you've ever experienced anything like that, but personally, but is there something, how can someone fight that urge to just shut down and get isolated?
That's a great point, because I think sometimes that's the tendency, is just want to circle the wagons and go in. So this is where having some good relationships in your life, people that you respect, people that can speak into you, not lecture you, not preach to you, but just be able to go, hey, this is not easy, but don't step away from the Lord. Don't do that. and we're here, or just kind of reaching out, going, I'm here for you. And the thing about it is people grieve differently. They go through the process differently. I remember talking with the lady one time, and never forget this. She was talking, and the anger and the hurt and the grief. She was telling me she lost her husband early through an accident. And I thought, honestly, John, I thought it happened a few months ago. It was 12 years. And so still carrying that. And so this is where the scripture says that we don't sorrow as others that have no hope, especially with the believer. There's that hope there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm asking God to comfort their hearts, to speak to because he can comfort them much more than we can. And so I, because you just want to see someone hit a spiral where they never get out of it, and they never come to a place where they get back and they get their joy back and they get their strength back. And the problem with isolation is you get isolated, you get grieving, you get down. Boy, you're a target.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, not that I'd be saying this even if we didn't have my senior pastor of my home church on the podcast, but I mean, it speaks to being involved and connected with your church family before these kinds of things happen. When you've got a solid foundation ahead of time, and you're not trying to circle the wagons after the fire's already at a 10 alarm fire. If you've got those connections and relationships and people know what you're going through, then they rally around. They don't ask permission. It's just kind of you've already given that unspoken permission to that church family, and people just start stepping in and doing things, and so I think that's for a church family, for you to be involved.
I totally agree. And, having people, and like I said, having people in your life that you respect,
mm-hmm.
that, people that you could say, hey, you're ready to talk, I'm here.
Yeah.
And and just, I think, again, not trying to talk too much too quick.
Yep.
I'm not trying to, get you to a great place right off the bat. I'm going to let you cry. I'm going to let you deal with something. If you're going to vent a little bit, I'm just going to let that pass over. But then I want to check back with you, make sure you don't stay there.
Yeah.
And let's talk. Let's talk about that. Let's look at this. Let's take a different perspective on that.
Yeah.
You don't want to stay down too long. Too much sorrow in your heart can break you.
Yeah.
And so you at some point you want to be able to move and give that to the Lord and go, I can't live with this burden on my heart.
Yeah. Would you say too, and I didn't plan to ask you this, but as you're talking, I'm starting to think guys are fixers. When you say what you said, I think guys want to swoop in and just kind of put the fire out. Do you notice a difference in grieving and who's better at it? If there is a better men and women, or women, because women are probably more likely to talk about their feelings, but
yes.
Who do you see kind of get through certain things better?
That's a great question, John. I think guys are the worst because we're supposed to suck it up, buttercup, and get going.
Yeah.
And the ladies feel like they have the freedom to talk and to vent. I talked with a guy who connected with a grieving group, and he said he's on this Zoom call, and there's one of him and about 15 women, and so we were actually talking about a ministry for men who have lost who've lost spouses. He said because it's hard to find a group of guys, and he said what happens is you feel like you're on an island and nobody understands. And so just having someone that can understand that loss is helpful. But as a whole, I think guys more would tend to go to the self-medication and just dealing with it, but not dealing with it, whereas ladies would have a tendency more to talk it out.
Yeah, the guys will go get in the tree stand, right, and for days, and women will go to the coffee shop with 10 of their friends, right?
Well, I heard a man. I heard somebody. I don't know if it was a man or not, but he said guys tend to do things side by side. He said women do things face to face. And so for guys, hey, we're going to go shoot hoops and we'll talk, or we'll go hunting or fishing and we'll talk. we're not typically going to sit down in a coffee shop and go, tell
Yeah.
me
Yeah. I was journaling the other day, and tell me what you think about. Yeah. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, we're going to kind of do stuff together. If I could build things, I would build things, but so I have to
Same.
come up with other stuff.
Same. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I relate to you so well is the handyman gene did not it skipped you and I believe. Thank God for YouTube. We're just we know enough to be dangerous. But so speak maybe. I mean, I know you mentioned your parents, but personally for the audience, I think we tend to, as a whole, look at the pastor, the group of pastors or vocational ministers and think, I mean, that's the pinnacle of how to handle grief. I mean, they do it perfectly. They run right in and just read cover to cover the whole Bible, and everybody feels better, and they've got a direct link to God. And so do you have some things that you can pull from your own life during a grieving process, maybe without getting into too many details as you're comfortable, but maybe for the guys that are wanting to know, what does Pastor Allen do when he's faced with a loss? And maybe it's not a death, but maybe it's just some sort of real pain or hardship.
You know what the challenge of church leadership is, even when you do face loss and face challenges, you still have to keep going.
Yeah.
And so it's the challenge is trying to keep it out of your preaching. And so, so that your pain, and I've done that in the past, and kind of use the church as y'all are in the therapy sessions, kind of, so you're listening to me. I noticed that with both my parents, it's interesting. Both of them were in bad health. Both of them were confined to a bed. Both of them had no quality of life, and so when they left and went home, in one sense of me, there was a sense of relief.
Mm-hmm.
But it was at the funeral that I felt the emotions. I spoke at my dad's funeral.
Yes.
And I was fine until I got up to speak, and then you feel that, and so I had to double clutch it.
Yep.
And continue. And so I recognized that at the funeral time, that was the same thing with my mom. We just did a very private ceremony with her, a gravesite with my sister and a couple of cousins. And my sister played some song about, the hands that the scarred hands are going to be holding you. I'm like, oh my God.
Oh yeah.
I was fine till you played that song.
Yeah.
My sister went, seriously? What's with that song? But that hit me emotionally. So I think sometimes, especially with guys, all of a sudden the emotion hits, and it may catch you at a surprise time.
Well, because we suppress it. It's kind of like that boil, I guess, gone long enough without care, it can rupture, right? And that I did the same thing. I read. I guess I'm one of the weird guys that writes, and I was writing. Well, you kind of do too. You're not. It's not weird if you do it. You're a poem. You're a poet. I wrote a poem, and I read it at my dad's funeral, and I don't know that I made it through very smoothly. So to your point, I know what that's like.
Right.
It's rough.
Those are rough, and yet you need those times. I always encourage. Here's a note, though, John. I always encourage people, especially people who've gone to the church, I ask that they not do the service in the main sanctuary. And so I'm so glad now we've got the youth building for large services.
Yeah,
it's very difficult for someone to do a funeral and see their loved one down there and then come back the next Sunday and worship.
Yes,
because now that's and I hate when people are like, we've got to do it here, and
that's a great idea. I'd never thought of that as to why I knew that you did that, but I didn't really relate to why, but that's an absolute perfect reason.
You want them to be able to come back. And
yeah.
I've actually had some funerals. I've gone to other churches, and some of the other pastors say, hey, this is going to be a big one. Can we have it at your place, not mine? And so, because it's very difficult to get past that.
It is. Well, and so with your parents, of course, you said there was like a relief. because to a degree, but loss is still loss. And then you start playing these home movies. Talk to somebody about maybe down the road, because it's not like you forget the people that you've lost. Of course you don't. How do the memories get easier to deal with? And I'm asking, I guess, selfishly, because it's been 7 years and I hear a song on the radio and here we go all over again. Right. So
and John, the holidays are tough because we do some of the same things during the holidays. We sing the same songs. We bring out some of the same, decorations. And so it's just memory trigger after memory trigger after memory trigger. So you really need to go in forewarned and armed for this is what's going to happen. So I always encourage people, hey, boy, if you know you've lost a loved one, you might want to maybe do something new, just different. Not change everything up, but just do something different. I think another thing is it's hard for people who haven't lost. My sister lost her only son. He was 16.
Oh man.
And it's tough because people don't know how to. Do we talk about the young man? Do we talk about his life? And a lot of times they want to talk. So I'll ask sometimes, hey, can we talk about Josh? Oh yeah, and she'll. And so I think sometimes I ask him, hey, can we talk about the loved one? I mean, it's the elephant in the room. They're not here. Can we talk? Can we talk about that or go over memories and memories? And I think over the years, what happens is you really start to lose sense of the bad and just the good ones stay. And so you can celebrate the good ones.
I think that, I agree. And I was going to ask you that before you ever went into that, but it is perfect timing, because I was going to ask, like, what if we proactively step into those situations and because we do that a little bit with my dad, it's like, remember when he did this, and maybe more of a lighter side of things, and I think that's what they would want. I mean, if it's me who's passed and you're sitting around at Christmas talking about me, the last thing I want is for people to be sad. So I think it's maybe important, like you said, to kind of walk in and get in front of those moments emotionally and kind of go in with, right into them.
I think that's the key, is getting in front of it. Yeah. And after when I had gone back to North Carolina and we'd done my memorial service for my mom, my sister and I just went to dinner. We just sat down and talked, and we talked about our life growing up, and we talked about some of the things that we had experienced. And I've noticed that because my sister helped take care of my mom, it hits her a little harder than it hits me. I've been
distance,
1,100 miles away. And so it's something. And so last time we were back there, she had found some tapes where my dad took these. Remember the Super 8 movie? This was, my parents I was born in the 50s. And so my parents, they had the Super 8 movies, and there were movies of my sister and I. We were young, and she played one. It was longer than I wanted to see movies, but it helped her and to go over those and to go over those memories. So we don't want to act like they didn't exist, but yet we need to be able to be, can someone handle this? Is this something we can talk about?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I can't imagine, losing a child. Like, I don't think, I just would be speechless if it was someone that I had to help through that, or, if it was us. I really don't know. Do you see, what are some mistakes you see spouses make? And I want to be respectful of your time. So this, I just wanted to cover this last part, but losing a child specifically, what are some of the things you see that drives maybe spouses, drives a wedge in, and it's a real thing, I would think, and it's probably an easy trap to fall into. So what are some things that you can say to the audience to maybe keep aware of that?
You have to, in those scenarios, and again, they can vary.
Yes.
But what you don't want to do is make the other spouse the enemy, the scapegoat, because that is some pain. There's something in life that says, I go before my children. Yes. And so in the scheme of life, it's not the normal thing that the child will go first. And so, to me, over the years, that's what that and losing a spouse been the I think the most challenging funerals
Mm-hmm.
I've ever had to do. And a lot of times on those kind of funerals, I've taken the text of David when he and Bathsheba had that first child and lost the first child.
Mm-hmm.
David had laid on the ground and fasted and prayed for a week. And when he lost the child, he saw the servants whispering, and because they were afraid he was going to kill himself. Think that he was so traumatized.
Mm-hmm.
And when he knew that the child had died, he gets up and washes his face and goes, and they're like, "We don't get it." And he said something that's so powerful. I think it's got to be the prevailing thought. He said, "I'll go to him one day. He can't come to me."
Mm-hmm.
And so his perspective, David's perspective, is that child's still there. There'll still be memories that we can make. We'll still see each other. He just can't come to me. He can't come to me.
Yeah, that's good. And I, since it's mostly men, I mean, 99.9% men that watch this or listen to this podcast, what's a great kind of piece of gold wisdom advice for them in that situation of maybe losing a child, or maybe a child's like very ill, or they're going through some sort of therapy with the kid? What can the dad do to help the mom? Like, what can we do to help our wives grieve or get through certain scenarios that are tragic?
I don't know about a lot of those guys. I know one of my key faults is I want to fix it and make it better.
Yeah.
And so, I'm looking at my wife going, "I need you to snap out of this and be better." And that is exactly what you don't do.
For sure.
Because that it just doesn't work. And so I think understanding how your wives will handle, the scriptures say to give honor to the wife as unto a weaker vessel.
Mm-hmm.
In some senses they're stronger than we are, but in some senses, if we honor them and treat them like they're, and sometimes they're going to be more fragile. And so I recognize with my own wife, recognizing she is more fragile, if I'll not try to fix it or just kind of get over it or do something, because it hurts me to see her hurt. And so I want to see that fixed. And sometimes my methods have not been good. So boy, if there's anything, that's the time to show kindness. That's the time to show patience. That's the time sometimes to hold them and not try to make it better.
Well, that's when you said that earlier about sometimes as friends helping others through something, sometimes you don't say anything. I think some of the best wisdom we can have is with our wives, especially, is to just sit with them and hold, like you said, hold them and let them know, like, when you're ready, I'm ready, but we don't have to rush this. And so I think that's good wisdom.
And let them cry. We hate to see our wives. We hate to see our wives cry, especially when they're hurting. But telling them to snap out of it is not a good idea. And so I think just letting them cry and I know that the times I've been most successful in that, Joy has said, she would say, "Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your patience." Mm-hmm. And I think that's the time, just some kindness and some patience.
Yep. That's good. That's good. Well, I mean, I really appreciate your insight today. Like, this is, like you said, the time of year made this message timely, and this conversation maybe is right on time for some folks that are struggling through this time. And you see it, you got a front row seat to a lot of that with some of the people that are in our church and just in ministry in general. So thank you for sharing some of that, some of your personal experiences. Audience, I would tell you, look, you don't have to live in Conroe, Texas to get more of Alan Clayton's messages and wisdom. You go to the Ark Church online, go to Ark Church. Let's see, ark.info. You can go register. I mean, you can be a member from Juneau, Alaska if you want, and catch his messages on Sundays and Wednesdays online. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. And if you've lost loved ones between now and last Thanksgiving, prayerfully enter that time. And but do the best thing to be a peacemaker and to bring comfort. And boy, that'll mean more than anything.
That's good. That's a good word. And audience, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. As always, he's been on before, and I love it. It's a blessing every time. Hopefully, we've got an open door policy with him, and maybe he can come back again. So with that,
always enjoy it, John. Always fun.
Good. He's been Alan Clayton. We've been Last in Line. Be blessed.
Make your escape.